The city sparkled below like a necklace of diamonds whenever night fell, but up on the hill where Richard Cole's mansion stood, the brilliance of lights could not warm the hollow chambers of his home. The mansion was an architectural marvel, a palace of glass and marble, admired by tourists and whispered about by neighbors who never once saw true joy cross its gates. To outsiders, Richard Cole lived the dream. He owned international businesses, collected rare cars that gleamed like jewels in his garage, and was known at every charity ball for his wealth and influence. But those who worked closest to him knew another truth. Behind the golden curtains and crystal chandeliers lived a man haunted by silence, raising children who seemed determined to drive everyone away. Richard had not always been this way. 10 years earlier, he was a husband, a father-to-be, a man who believed that the universe had blessed him twice over. When his wife, Eleanor, gave birth to twins, Daniel and Diana, the world seemed brighter. Eleanor was the gentlest soul, the only person who could soften Richard's sharp edges. But fate had not been kind. Complications during childbirth took Eleanor's life, leaving Richard shattered and with 2 infants crying in his arms. He had money, yes, but money could not hold a baby at 3 in the morning, nor could it sing lullabies in a mother's voice. He hired nurses, then nannies, then teachers, but his guilt grew like ivy around his heart. Richard buried himself in work, building his empire even larger, convincing himself that if he gave his children every material comfort, he would not be failing them. What he did not realize was that his absence created a wound in their small hearts, one that no amount of toys or luxury vacations could heal. By the time Daniel and Diana were 9, the world saw them as spoiled brats. But the truth was different. They were hurting, confused, and angry, though they lacked the words to explain it. They knew only one thing: everyone left. Their mother left without saying goodbye. Their father left every morning for meetings and returned only when they were asleep. And every nanny they were given disappeared in a matter of weeks, unable to endure the storm of their grief-fueled mischief. The mansion, despite its beauty, had become a place of war. The coldness of wealth. The Cole mansion was a house designed for admiration, not for love. The dining table could seat 20, but rarely did 3 chairs fill. Chandeliers worth fortunes hung above rooms that were empty of laughter. Even the garden, once meant for family picnics, grew wild and untamed because the twins used it as a battleground for their games of defiance. Servants worked quietly, avoiding the children when possible, for they knew that one wrong word could lead to a trick or prank designed to humiliate them. A butler once found his shoes glued to the floor. A cook discovered salt poured into every sugar jar. These antics were not harmless mischief, they were the twins' way of saying, if we make you miserable enough, you'll leave us too. At least we'll be in control this time. Richard noticed the staff turnover but blamed it on incompetence. He refused to admit that his children were spiraling out of control. When confronted by teachers or relatives, he would say, "They are strong-willed. It's better than being weak." Yet when he returned to his vast, lonely bedroom at night, he sometimes overheard his children's muffled arguments through the walls, their anger thinly veiling their loneliness. Those moments stabbed deeper than any business failure ever could. The broken father. Though Richard's face was known in magazines and on business news, very few people saw the man when the cameras were gone. He was only 38, yet his hair had begun to silver, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He carried the weight of responsibility like armor, never showing his vulnerability to the world. But when he sat at his mahogany desk late at night, surrounded by contracts and reports, his gaze often drifted to the framed photograph of Eleanor, holding the twins as babies. Her smile seemed alive, her eyes gentle as always, and Richard would feel a pang so sharp it stole his breath. He would whisper, "I'm trying, Ellie, but I don't know how." His grief manifested as control. He tried to manage the household like he managed his businesses: efficiency, rules, order. Yet children were not employees, they did not thrive under cold schedules or rigid expectations. The twins needed warmth, attention, and forgiveness, things Richard could barely give because he feared his own emotions. He believed that if he opened the floodgates, he might drown in sorrow. The twins' silent pact. Meanwhile, Daniel and Diana had built an invisible wall around themselves. Though they argued constantly, they were united in one mission: no nanny would survive. Daniel was bold, mischievous, the leader of their schemes. His eyes sparkled with rebellion whenever a new caretaker walked in, as if daring them to try. Diana, quieter but sharper, used her intelligence to manipulate situations, weaving lies and tantrums that drove nannies to the edge. Together, they were unstoppable. One memorable afternoon, a nanny named Mrs. Whitfield attempted to enforce a strict bedtime. At midnight, she awoke to eerie whispers outside her door, followed by a loud crash. Rushing out, she found the twins standing in the hallway, draped in white bed sheets, chanting, "Mama's ghost is angry." Their eyes glowed with the reflection of candlelight, their faces painted pale with flour. Mrs. Whitfield fled the mansion before sunrise, never to return. The twins laughed, but beneath their laughter was an unspoken pain. If no one stayed, then no one could hurt them by leaving. Richard's frustration. Each time another nanny left, Richard's patience thinned. "Why can't you behave?" he demanded one evening, slamming his fist on the dining table. His voice echoed through the cavernous room, but the twins stared back defiantly. "Maybe if you were here more, we wouldn't need nannies," Diana muttered under her breath. The word struck like a knife, though Richard masked the wound with anger. "Enough," he shouted. "You have everything children could want. Do you think other kids live like this? Show some gratitude." Daniel crossed his arms, his small jaw clenched. "We don't want your money. We want Mama back." The silence that followed was unbearable. Richard rose from the table, leaving his untouched meal behind, and locked himself in his study. The twins stormed upstairs, slamming doors. The mansion shook with tension, a prison of wealth where love had been buried long ago. The rumors. Outside, whispers spread. Neighbors speculated about the cursed twins, who devoured nannies like wolves. The press, eager for scandal, hinted at Richard's inability to balance fatherhood and empire. Some even suggested he send the twins to boarding school abroad, away from his sight. But Richard, for all his mistakes, could not bear the thought. He had lost his wife, he would not abandon his children, even if he did not know how to save them. In private moments, he admitted to himself that he was afraid, not of his children, but of facing the truth they forced upon him. They were mirrors, reflecting his failures as a father. A silent prayer. On one particularly lonely night, Richard stood by the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing down at the glittering city. His reflection stared back at him, a powerful man who had conquered industries but could not tame the storm in his own home. "Eleanor," he whispered to the stars, "if you can hear me, send me someone who can reach them. Someone stronger than me. Someone who won't give up." It was not a prayer he expected to be answered. Yet, unknown to him, change was already on its way. Because soon, a woman named Grace would walk through those iron gates, humble, patient, and unlike anyone who had come before. And the walls of the Cole mansion, built with marble and sorrow, would finally begin to crack. The Cole twins had a reputation long before their 10th birthday. In the city below, whispers followed their name like shadows. No nanny survived more than a month in the Cole mansion. It was almost a legend, retold by drivers at taxi stands and vendors at market corners. Some blamed the children's wealth, saying they were spoiled beyond repair. Others spoke of curses and restless spirits, pointing to the tragic death of their mother as proof that sorrow haunted the family. But inside the mansion, where the truth lived behind locked gates and echoing marble halls, the war was not folklore. It was a carefully orchestrated rebellion, designed by two children who felt abandoned by the world. Daniel and Diana Cole had sworn a silent pact: no one would ever replace their mother, and no one would ever stay long enough to pretend they could. The pattern of defiance. It always began the same way. A new nanny would arrive at the mansion, some strict and businesslike, others soft and overly cheerful. Each walked in with hope in their eyes, clutching detailed schedules or carrying promises of fun. The twins watched them carefully, studying their weaknesses, waiting for the right moment to strike. The first day was usually peaceful. The children played their parts, acting polite, even sweet. They knew from experience that if they attacked too soon, the nanny might still believe she could fix them. But by the second day, the cracks began to show. Diana would refuse meals, pushing away perfectly cooked dishes with an exaggerated scowl. "I hate it," she'd declare, even if it was her favorite food. Daniel would vanish during lessons, only to be discovered hours later hiding in the attic, laughing at the nanny's frantic search. By the end of the first week, the twins unleashed their creativity. One nanny found her bedroom filled with balloons, each containing water instead of air. Another discovered her expensive handbag stuffed with worms from the garden. Daniel once dismantled the wheels from a nanny's car, just to watch her panic when she tried to leave. Diana, clever and sharper with words, told guests outrageous lies, that the nanny locked them in closets, that she screamed in the night, that she stole jewelry. None of it was true, but the accusations planted seeds of fear. The haunted house game. The cruelest prank of all became infamous among the mansion staff, the haunting. One stormy night, when the wind howled through the garden trees and thunder rattled the windows, the twins dressed in white bedsheets and smeared flour on their faces. They tiptoed to the nanny's door at midnight, whispering in ghostly tones, "Mama's home. Mama's angry." When the nanny opened the door, she found the hallway lined with candles the children had stolen from the dining room. Their pale faces glowed eerily in the flickering light as they chanted in unison. Behind them, a recorded voice of Eleanor, taken from an old home video, played from a speaker Daniel had hidden. The nanny screamed so loudly that half the staff rushed to the scene. By dawn, her suitcases were packed, and she was gone. The twins laughed for days about that one, though deep inside, both carried the hollow ache of guilt. They had invoked their mother's name not because they found it funny, but because it was the only way they still felt close to her. In their twisted logic, making others fear her ghost was a way of keeping her memory alive. The mansion in turmoil. The staff suffered most of all. Each new nanny brought disruption. Schedules changed, routines broke down, and the children's tempers grew worse with every departure. Servants whispered in the kitchen that the mansion was cursed. Some begged Richard to stop hiring nannies altogether, fearing the wrath of the twins would soon turn on them. But Richard refused. "They need discipline," he insisted. "They need order." He could not admit what everyone else suspected, that the twins didn't need discipline. They needed healing. They weren't misbehaving because they enjoyed chaos. They were building walls, walls so high no nanny could climb them, walls so thick no kindness could seep through. And so the cycle continued. One nanny after another arrived with optimism and left in tears. A war without mercy. Daniel thrived on chaos. He was the soldier in their war, bold and reckless. Every new nanny was his enemy, every rule an opportunity to rebel. He once locked a nanny in the pantry for 3 hours, slipping notes under the door that read, "Abandon hope, all who enter here." He thought it was clever. He didn't realize, or perhaps refused to realize, that the woman's trembling hands afterward were not just anger, they were fear. Diana, meanwhile, was the strategist. She understood emotions, knew exactly which words could wound deepest. When one nanny tried to enforce bedtime, Diana stood at the foot of her bed and whispered, "You'll leave like the rest. Everyone does. Mama left too." The nanny had no response, and by morning, she handed in her resignation. The twins never spoke about it aloud, but each time someone left, they felt a hollow victory. They had proven their point, no one would stay. Yet in the quiet of their rooms, when the lights were off and the halls empty, they sometimes lay awake, wondering if perhaps they had chased away the one person who might have truly cared. Richard's blindness. Richard knew the facts, nannies came and went, the twins misbehaved, the household was unstable, but he misinterpreted the cause. To him, it was simple, his children were spoiled. He saw their rebellion as arrogance, not as grief. One evening, after a particularly disastrous incident where the twins filled a nanny's car with mud, Richard confronted them in the study. "Why must you embarrass me?" he shouted, his fist slamming against the desk. His voice thundered, but the children did not flinch. Daniel glared, his jaw set, while Diana folded her arms. "You're the one embarrassing us," she muttered. Richard froze. "What did you say?" "You're never here," Diana snapped, her voice breaking. "You buy us toys, but you don't even know what we like. You bring strangers into our house and expect us to love them like their family. We don't want them. We don't want anyone. We want Mama back." The room fell silent. Richard's face paled, but instead of responding with tenderness, he turned away. His grief was too raw, too unresolved. He left the study without another word, retreating to the one place he felt in control, his office. Behind him, the twins exchanged a look. They had won another battle, but the victory tasted bitter. The breaking point. The war against nannies escalated until the mansion reached a breaking point. Servants threatened to quit, the staff agency refused to send replacements, and Richard found himself more isolated than ever. His children were wildfires, and he had no water left to douse them. The twins, though triumphant in their rebellion, were secretly exhausted. The pranks no longer brought joy, the victories no longer felt sweet. Each time a nanny left, the emptiness in their hearts deepened. Yet they clung to their pact, too proud, and too afraid, to admit what they really wanted, someone who wouldn't leave. It was in this fragile, broken state that Grace appeared. Unlike the others, she did not arrive in a luxury car with polished shoes and rehearsed smiles. She came quietly, humbly, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a calm presence. The twins eyed her with the same suspicion as they had every other nanny, preparing their arsenal of tricks. But this time, fate had other plans. The war was about to meet its end. The day Grace arrived at the Cole mansion was unlike any other. There was no grand entrance, no agency car pulling up with crisp uniforms and rehearsed smiles. Instead, she came walking down the long driveway in a simple blue dress, carrying a small, weathered suitcase that looked older than she was. The guards at the gate had not been expecting her. Most new nannies came through agencies with proper paperwork, but when she handed them a folded letter, they nodded and waved her through. Inside the mansion, Richard Cole raised his eyebrows when she was introduced. Grace did not look like the kind of woman who belonged in a billionaire's household. She was tall and lean, her dark skin glowing under the chandelier light, her hair wrapped neatly in a scarf. There was no arrogance in her eyes, no timid fear either, just a steady calm that unsettled him. "You've read the file?" Richard asked, leaning back in his chair. "You understand what you're walking into?" Grace nodded. 2 children. Twins. 9 years old. 10, Richard corrected. And impossible. A small smile tugged at her lips. "No child is impossible, sir. Only misunderstood." It was a bold statement, one that made Richard's jaw tighten. Dozens had said similar things before her, only to leave in tears. But there was something in Grace's tone, firm yet gentle, that silenced his skepticism. "Very well," he said at last. "We'll see how long you last." First impressions. The twins were waiting. Daniel lounged on the staircase railing like a cat ready to pounce, while Diana stood on the landing above, her arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They had perfected this ritual, sizing up the newcomer, searching for weaknesses, deciding how best to strike. When Grace entered the hall, Daniel smirked. "Another victim. Another ghost," Diana whispered back. But Grace did not flinch. She looked at them, not with the forced cheer of past nannies nor the stern glare of disciplinarians. Instead, she inclined her head slightly, as though greeting royalty. "You must be Daniel and Diana," she said. "I've heard a great deal about you." The twins exchanged a glance. Usually, the introduction came with warnings, rules, and a lecture about respect. But Grace offered none of that. Daniel hopped down, testing her. "You're supposed to take care of us." "Not supposed to," Grace replied softly. "I choose to." Diana frowned. "Why?" "Because every child deserves someone who chooses them." The answer unsettled them. This was not the script they expected. Testing the stranger. The war began immediately. That night at dinner, Diana pushed away her plate, declaring, "I'm allergic to carrots." Grace, without missing a beat, set the plate aside and asked, "And what would you like instead?" Diana blinked. Nannies usually argued, lectured, or forced her to eat. Pasta?" Grace nodded. "Then pasta it is. But tomorrow, you'll help me cook it." It wasn't surrender, nor was it command. It was partnership. Diana didn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, Daniel plotted. The next morning, he slipped a frog into Grace's laundry basket, waiting for the scream. Hours later, he peeked inside, expecting chaos, but instead found the frog sitting comfortably in a makeshift bowl of water, nibbling on lettuce leaves. A note beside it read, "Thank you for the pet. His name is Lucky now." Daniel's mouth dropped open. No nanny had ever reacted like that. The quiet strength. Grace's power was not loud, not forceful. She did not bark orders or chase them through the halls. Instead, she listened. When Diana threw a tantrum, Grace sat patiently until the storm passed, then asked quietly, "Are you angry at me, or at something inside you?" When Daniel refused to come to lessons, Grace didn't drag him out. She went into his hiding place in the attic, sat on the floor beside him, and began humming an old folk song until he joined in out of curiosity. She treated their mischief not as battles to win but as messages to decode. The twins didn't understand her. They tried harder. They smeared paint on her bed sheets. Grace simply washed them, humming the same tune. They swapped sugar for salt in her tea. She sipped it, made a face, and chuckled. "Too salty for my taste, but thank you for the effort." Every prank they launched slid off her like water on stone. There was no fear, no anger, no surrender. It was the first time the twins encountered someone who refused to play their game. Seeds of curiosity. Days turned into weeks. The twins found themselves curious. Grace told stories in the evenings while folding laundry or chopping vegetables. She spoke of her childhood in a small village, where children played with wooden toys and made kites from scraps of paper. She described nights when her family sang together around a fire, even if dinner was nothing but rice and beans. Daniel scoffed at first. "That sounds boring." Grace only smiled. Boring can be beautiful. When you have less, you learn to love more. But secretly, Daniel thought about it later in bed. He had every toy imaginable, yet he often felt emptier than the boy in her story. But secretly, Daniel thought about it later in bed. He had every toy imaginable, yet he often felt emptier than the boy in her story. Diana, meanwhile, grew fascinated with Grace's patience. One afternoon, Diana spilled paint across the floor, expecting a lecture. Instead, Grace knelt down, dipped her finger in the mess, and drew a flower. "Sometimes mistakes can be art," she said softly. Diana's eyes widened. No one had ever responded to her accidents like that. For the first time, she began to see mistakes not as weapons but as possibilities. Resistance and cracks. Still, change did not come easily. The twins were too proud, too wounded, to surrender quickly. One night, they conspired to lock Grace out of the house. Laughing, they watched from the upstairs window as she stood at the door in the rain. Any other nanny would have screamed, pounded, or called Richard. But Grace simply sat down on the porch steps, humming her song as the rain soaked her scarf. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, guilt gnawed at Diana until she crept downstairs and unlocked the door. You could have called for help, she said, her voice trembling. Grace looked at her gently. Why? I knew you'd open the door eventually. I trust you. It was the first crack in the twins' armor. Trust was not something they were used to. Richard's observation. Richard watched from a distance, bewildered. He had expected Grace to quit within days. Yet here she was, weeks later, not only surviving but thriving. He noticed how Daniel began sitting at the table again, how Diana's tantrums grew shorter, how the servants whispered less about curses and more about hope. The mansion itself seemed to breathe differently, lighter, warmer, alive. Still, Richard couldn't understand how Grace did it. He tried asking her once. They listen to you, he said one evening. Why? Grace smiled softly. Because I listen to them. Richard had no reply. A subtle shift. Slowly, the twins began to shift. Daniel still played pranks, but now they were playful, not cruel. Diana still tested boundaries, but sometimes she sought Grace's approval instead of her defeat. They began following her through the house, curious about her songs, her stories, her cooking. And though they never said it aloud, they began to wonder, could she be different? Could she be the one who stays? For the first time in years, hope stirred, fragile, hesitant, but real. Grace had not yet won their hearts completely. The war wasn't over. But the battle had shifted. The twins were no longer fighting against her, they were fighting against themselves, against the walls they had built to keep love away. And Grace, patient as the earth, was ready to wait. The mansion had grown quieter since Grace arrived, but quiet did not mean peace. For all her patience, for all her songs and stories, there still lingered a heavy shadow over Daniel and Diana, something Grace could sense but not yet touch. The children smiled more often now, their laughter no longer sharp with cruelty, but their eyes still carried an unspoken weight. Grace knew from experience that every wall had a crack. It was only a matter of finding where to press. The grand test. It happened one rainy Saturday. The twins had been whispering to each other all morning, their heads bent close, their voices too low for Grace to catch. She recognized the signs, another test. She braced herself. By afternoon, the storm outside had swelled into thunder. Grace entered the library to find the twins waiting for her. Daniel held a smirk, Diana a suspiciously sweet smile. We've planned something fun, Daniel announced. Grace arched an eyebrow. Fun for whom? For all of us, Diana insisted. Before Grace could respond, they seized her hands and tugged her upstairs. She allowed herself to be dragged, curious. They led her into the old storage room at the far end of the hallway, a place thick with dust and forgotten furniture. Sit here, Daniel said, pointing to a wooden chair in the center. Grace sat. The door slammed shut. A key turned in the lock. She was trapped. Outside the door, their laughter rang like bells. Let's see how long she lasts. Daniel shouted. Grace chuckled softly to herself. So this was their grand scheme. But instead of panic, she leaned back, folded her hands in her lap, and began humming her favorite song. The sound drifted under the door, calm and steady. Hours passed. The storm raged. The children peeked through the keyhole now and then, expecting tears, shouting, or pleas for freedom. But Grace only hummed, sometimes breaking into soft words of prayer. Eventually, silence replaced their laughter. Cracks in the armor. Diana was the first to weaken. She pressed her forehead against the door. Why aren't you angry? She asked through the crack. Grace's voice floated back, warm and unshaken. Because anger won't open the door, my dear. But love might. Daniel scowled. Stop pretending. Everyone gets angry. You're right, Grace said gently. I get angry. I just don't let it choose my actions. Her calm unsettled them more than fury ever could. For the first time, the twins felt unsure of their own game. By evening, Diana grew restless. She sat on the floor outside the door, hugging her knees. Daniel paced, torn between pride and something softer gnawing at him. At last, Diana whispered, "Do you think she'll leave if we let her out?" Daniel hesitated. He remembered every nanny before, how they screamed, cursed, and stormed out, never to return. Part of him wanted to push until Grace broke too. But another part, quieter, frightened, wanted her to stay. "We'll see," he muttered, though his chest ached with doubt. The door opens. It was nearly midnight when the lock finally clicked. The door creaked open, revealing Diana's small, guilty face. Grace stood, stretching her stiff legs, and stepped into the hall. She did not scold them. She did not lecture. She simply looked at them with soft, searching eyes. "Thank you for opening the door," she said. Her gratitude pierced deeper than any anger could. Diana's throat tightened. Daniel looked away. "Why didn't you tell our father?" he challenged, his voice rough. "Because this is between us," Grace answered. "Not him. I trust you to do better tomorrow." Trust. That word again. It lingered like a key turning inside their hearts. Shadows of the past. Over the next days, the children grew quieter. The mischief slowed, replaced by long silences and sudden outbursts of emotion they couldn't explain. Grace knew what was happening. The walls they had built for years were beginning to crumble. One evening, while Grace was preparing tea, she found Diana curled on the window seat, clutching a worn photograph. Grace approached gently. "May I sit?" Diana nodded, eyes brimming. She handed over the photo without a word. It was of a woman, beautiful, smiling, with the same dark hair as Diana and the same sharp eyes as Daniel. Their mother. "She left us," Diana whispered. Grace studied the girl's trembling hands. "Do you believe she wanted to?" Diana shook her head fiercely. "She did. She didn't care about us. If she did, she wouldn't have gone." Grace placed the photo back in her lap. "Sometimes people leave, not because they don't love us, but because they are hurting too much to stay." Diana's tears spilled over. "I hate her." Grace wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay to feel that. But hate is heavy, my dear. It will only hurt you." For the first time, Diana cried openly, not in anger, not in manipulation, but in grief. Grace held her until she slept. Daniel's confession. Daniel was harder. His pride was a fortress even thicker than his sister's. But Grace waited. It was late one night when she found him in the attic, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a torn notebook. He shoved it behind him when she entered, but not fast enough. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Nothing." Grace sat opposite him, silent. After a long pause, he pulled out the notebook and shoved it at her. Inside were sketches, pages and pages of drawings. Some were crude, others astonishingly detailed. Many were of his mother. Grace flipped through them with awe. "You're an artist," she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. She's gone. No one cares." "I care," Grace said simply. His eyes widened, searching hers for a lie. But he found none. For the first time, he let someone see the part of him he had hidden, the longing, the hurt, the talent that had nowhere to go. "Do you miss her?" Grace asked softly. Daniel's lip trembled. "Every day." Grace reached across and squeezed his hand. No lecture, no false promises. Just presence. And that was enough. The turning point. From that night onward, something shifted. The twins still bickered, still tested boundaries, but the cruelty drained from their mischief. They began to follow Grace willingly, not out of defiance but out of trust. Diana asked to help in the kitchen. Daniel showed Grace his drawings without shame. At night, they sometimes begged her to sing them to sleep, a request they had never made of anyone before. Richard noticed the difference. For the first time in years, his children laughed without bitterness. Their footsteps no longer echoed like thunder but danced like rain. When he asked Grace how she managed it, she answered only, "Love breaks walls faster than force ever will." The promise. One evening, as Grace tucked them into bed, Diana whispered, "Will you stay? Please don't leave like the others." Grace's chest ached. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. "I will stay as long as you'll have me." Daniel, pretending not to care, muttered from the other bed, "You'd better mean that." Grace smiled. "I always mean what I say." The twins exchanged a glance. For the first time in years, they felt safe enough to believe her. The walls they had built, walls of anger, defiance, and grief, were crumbling at last. And though the scars of abandonment still lingered, the first rays of healing had broken through. Grace had done what no one else could, she had reached the unreachable, loved the unlovable, and shown two wounded children that family could be chosen, not just lost. The mansion, once a fortress of loneliness, was beginning to feel like a home again. The Cole mansion had always been filled with sound, echoes of footsteps, the hum of staff at work, the occasional outbursts of the twins' pranks, but never before had it known the gentle rhythm of laughter. It was strange, at first, how something so simple could change the entire atmosphere of a home. One could almost believe that the marble floors and glass walls had softened, that the grand house had drawn closer around its family, no longer a palace but a home. For Richard Cole, the transformation was both breathtaking and terrifying. He had grown so used to the silence of distance, to conversations with his children that ended in slammed doors, that when he walked into the dining room one Thursday evening and found his twins giggling with Grace, he almost froze in the doorway. Daniel was halfway through telling a story about a frog he had tried to smuggle into the kitchen, and Diana was laughing so hard she could barely hold her spoon. Grace sat between them, listening with that steady, patient smile that never seemed to leave her face, and when she noticed Richard standing there, she simply gestured for him to join them. Richard sat, hesitant, waiting for the laughter to die down, expecting awkward silence to fall the way it always did when he appeared. But this time, it didn't. Daniel turned to him with the easy confidence of a boy who no longer feared rejection and said, "Dad, you should have seen her face." The cook nearly fainted when the frog jumped out of the basket. The boy's eyes sparkled, not with defiance but with playfulness. Diana added, "Grace told him not to be cruel to animals, so he built a little pond in the garden instead. Come see it later." Richard nodded, his throat tight, as something inside him broke. He had been absent for so long that he didn't know his son cared about animals, or that his daughter liked sitting in the garden. And yet here they were, chattering freely, treating him not as a stranger but as their father. It was Grace's doing. He knew it. Richard's awakening. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, Richard called Grace into his study. The room was dimly lit, lined with shelves of law books, business manuals, and family photographs that looked more like museum relics than cherished memories. He poured himself a drink but left it untouched, staring instead at the woman who had achieved what seemed impossible. "Tell me the truth," he said. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of the commanding tone he wore in boardrooms. "How did you do it? What magic did you use on them?" Grace shook her head, folding her hands calmly in front of her. "There's no magic, sir. Children don't want perfection. They don't even want riches. They want to be heard. They want to feel that someone will stay even when they misbehave. That's all I did, I stayed." Her words struck him like a hammer to stone. Richard had given his twins everything he thought mattered, education, toys, comfort, but he had not given them himself. He had not stayed. Every time their grief pushed him away, he let distance grow. And in that distance, the twins had learned to protect themselves with anger. Grace continued, her voice steady, "They love you, sir. More than they'll ever admit. But they needed someone to remind them that love doesn't leave. Once they believed that, they softened. Richard leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. For years, he had carried his grief like a shield, thinking it would protect him from pain. But all it had done was keep his children at arm's length. He realized, with a stab of regret, that he had been punishing them for the very thing that haunted him, loss. The father's first step. The next evening, Richard made a decision. When dinner was served, instead of retreating to his study as usual, he stayed at the table after the meal. He cleared his throat, nerves tightening his chest, and said quietly, "I want to tell you both a story." The twins looked at him curiously. Grace, sensing the importance of the moment, quietly excused herself and left the room. "This was when your mother and I were young," Richard began. His voice trembled slightly, but he forced himself to continue. "We didn't have much money back then. Nothing like this house, nothing like the cars you see outside. But we were happy. Your mother had this way of making me laugh even when I wanted to be angry. Once, when I lost an important deal, she made me sit on the floor and eat burnt toast because she said, 'Life can't be that serious if you still have bread to eat.'" Daniel snorted. Diana giggled. Richard smiled faintly, the memory warming him. For the first time, he let himself speak of Eleanor without drowning in guilt. "I miss her every day," he admitted. His eyes filled with tears, and he did not hide them. "And I know you do too. I thought, if I worked harder, if I built all this," he gestured vaguely to the mansion around them, "it would make up for what we lost. But I see now, I was wrong." There was silence. Then Diana slid her small hand across the table and placed it over his. "We don't need all this, Dad. We just needed you." The words shattered him. Tears spilled freely down his cheeks, and for the first time since Eleanor's death, Richard pulled his children into his arms and let them feel his grief. The twins, clinging to him, cried too, not the angry, frustrated cries of rebellion but the raw sobs of children finally releasing years of pain. It was messy, it was heartbreaking, and yet it was healing. A new beginning. From that night onward, Richard changed. He began with small steps, joining the twins at breakfast, walking with them in the garden, listening to their stories no matter how trivial. He learned that Daniel dreamed of being a scientist, fascinated by experiments and animals. He discovered that Diana loved painting and spent hours mixing colors to capture sunsets. He had missed so much, but he vowed never to miss again. Grace remained by their side, guiding quietly, never demanding credit. When Richard praised her, she only said, "Children bloom when they are watered with love. You are their father, you are the one who makes the difference." And she was right. The mansion transformed. The servants, once cautious, now worked in a home that rang with laughter. The neighbors noticed too, gone were the rumors of cursed twins. Instead, they saw children who played freely in the garden, their father often with them. Even Richard's business partners saw the change. He still worked hard, but he no longer hid in endless meetings. He came to gatherings with a lighter step, his sharpness tempered with warmth. He was, for the first time, a complete man, not just a millionaire, but a father. A final lesson. Months later, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, Richard took the twins and Grace to her grave. The day was quiet, the sky painted with soft gray clouds. He carried flowers, white lilies, Eleanor's favorite, and placed them gently on the stone. Daniel and Diana stood close, their hands gripping his tightly. For years, they had been denied the chance to grieve openly, but now they bowed their heads together. "I want you to know," Richard said softly, his voice steady, "your mother loved you more than life itself. And I will never leave you the way she had to. From now on, we face everything together." The twins nodded, tears glistening but smiles breaking through. Grace stood a few steps back, watching silently. She knew her work was nearly done. Families healed not through miracles but through choices, through the courage to love even when it hurt. As they walked back to the car, Daniel slipped his arm around Grace's waist. "You're part of our family too, you know," he said shyly. Diana nodded. "The best part." Grace's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. She had promised herself never to replace their mother, but in their hearts, she had become something equally precious, proof that love could return when you least expected it. The mansion with a heart. The Cole mansion remained grand, its marble walls and crystal chandeliers still dazzling, but those things no longer defined it. What mattered were the moments inside, the sound of Richard teaching Daniel chess, Diana's paintings pinned proudly on the walls, Grace's humming drifting from the kitchen, and the echo of laughter filling spaces once silent. Richard had once prayed for someone to save his children. He had not realized that in saving them, he would also save himself. And so the story of the millionaire and his impossible twins came to an end, not with another nanny fleeing into the night, but with a family restored, stronger than they had ever been. For love, once given freely, has a way of making even the grandest mansion feel like home.